Hello all, I'm DFuxa, and welcome to my aspect tier list, or essentially a class tier list for the basic classes you can basically play as in the game Inkbound. In total, there is basically 8 aspects you can basically play as: the Magnamire, the Moth Cloak, the Weaver, the Obelisk, the Clairvoyant, the Godkeeper, the Chainbreaker, and the Star Captain. I played this game, completed like the rank 20 for all of these classes, as well as done in group and solo. And I basically felt it's basically time to sort of drop some insights on the game and what I basically think is best or not best basically to play. So let's get started. Now, a note that I basically have, of course, a tier list. This was actually made by Fuzzy Wall over here on the tier list website. So we're going to be using this to sort of show off the game. All right, so he's got basically a basic S to D sort of ranking here. There's no Fs. I kind of feel there probably should be an F, so might want to edit that, maybe. We'll add a row below. And we're just going to make this the, the F tier. Let's see here. Let's make this blue. F. And I could, edit this to have, my usual, swagger and stuff like that, but whatever. We're just going to leave this basically as is for now. So let's start off with the Magnamire here. This is basically the starter, aspect for the game. And he's pretty, simple to basically play. Essentially just, wave around your big hammer there and just go smack and bonk and everything else. Overall, I have to say, I'm a little bit disappointed though with the Magnamire because even though he is quite simple to play, he doesn't really have, a lot of, flashy sort of, details that really make him pop out. A lot of his damage will be coming from bonk and looping strike. And then he has smash here, but I find that smash basically has a bit of an issue with it where a lot of its aspects and stuff like that, or not like that, it's bindings basically. It's augments to its bindings. When you basically use smashes bindings and stuff like that, it's basically all based on killing enemies with it, as opposed to just doing upfront damage. And even though you can get some pretty good damage out of the Magnamire if you get the right combination for it, it's not necessarily always going to be the case to basically get those bindings and such. Looking at the Magnamire here, basically, he's got a lot of interesting sort of abilities to sort of stack burn. Inflict shatter, because he's basically got physical attributes and all three of his things here. Sometimes he can extract orbs to keep going. He's got a critical bonk, as most characters basically do. Zero will basically use it a couple times, and then increase damage. He's got leap here, which probably is best skill by way to use leap, because this lets him avoid blight. Essentially just smash things wherever you're on the field. You can daze enemies with it. You can get some shield. Of course, inflict more burn, more critical, more damage. Make it a little bit cheaper to use because it is well, it's only one cost, but you can make it even cheaper for the first turn. And yeah, smash here. So smash can get some good stuff, but as you can see, it's on defeat you basically get bonuses. And on defeat, you basically get an orb. It's a cool idea, this class, but I mean, I find that it's very hard to sort of build up smash sometimes. So it's a bit of hit or miss sometimes, with the skill and will cost. That's actually sort of useful to this one because it actually costs 2. So subsequent use of his skill will still cost only 1. But yes, looking at these skills here. The thing about the Magnamire basically is all about building up heat, or building up quillings, or building burn. And a lot of this can be like, very interesting to use, but the problem is like, it's like on Smash ability here. If this was basically a little bit more like, not like on enemy defeat, so to speak, it would have been a lot better, I think. But as it basically is, unless like you get like, detonate here, for example, you can't always be sure you're basically going to defeat the enemy in like one hit. Like Tantrum is basically like, on defeating an enemy, because it's like a cost cooldown, but unless you basically like, are like inflicting like lots of damage prior to that, you're not going to be like, getting like the Tantrum basically off. And then there's Demolish here, which like, it gives you like coolings, and it's like gives you like, coolings basically to defeat stuff. It's good if you want to basically build up coolings to basically get like Vestiges and stuff like that, but really you just need to get like Detonate in order to like, really be like, start with this class. The other thing to note about like Detonate here is it basically like works off burn. So this is actually one of these like classes that's like, very like, very like, sort of like, needing to like, get like an incinerator like, binding here. And let's go show it off. This binding right here. If you don't get incinerated on like the Magnemite, you're basically gonna be like nerfing yourself quite a bit. So it's like it can do like quite well, but it requires you to actually like get it get like incinerated in order to like be like really effective. For these reasons, I can't say I think much of the Magnemite because he's got issues, and even though he's like the worst class I don't think he can play, he's basically like sort of like a feeling great to me. So we're gonna throw him in D tier because he's not the like absolutely the worst, but I mean, unless like you basically get like like Detonate, which is like 1 in 3, like well, I shouldn't say 1 in 3, but you actually have to make sure like you don't get the R2. It's gonna be like an issue for you basically with this guy. All right, moving on to the next one. Moss Cloak. Now, I've had a lot of good success with the Moss Cloak. This guy can be specialized to build like high damaging builds that like can inflict like a lot of damage with like Flurry. Basically, you can put like mark on someone to basically get like double damage, and then you gotta like put like Flurry on to basically like inflict like 5 like shurikens all at once to do like massive damage to enemies. And it can be really fun to basically play with the Moss Cloak because you basically dash around the field. But there's something basically note about this guy here a little bit. Even though he's basically like specialized in like doing damage, I find this is basically a character basically like really like lends itself to being like a poison based type of character. Looking at my like bindings for this guy, this class basically, or I guess we'll go to like the odds here first. This guy basically lends himself to basically being like, a poison type of caster. Basically, he's got like poison throw. He's got like, poison tip like throw here. And I think the others is like, more damaging criticals and stuff like that. And he has like, poison dash, like poison here. And of course, like critical charge basically means you can like, do more damage like flurry and stuff like that. Strength and dash to increase like your damage here a little bit. Down here, he basically has like poison flurry. So this is a class that basically has a whole lot of like poison based like attacks. And though you basically could build this guy basically like just pure damage if you want to, you're really missing out because I think this guy's basically more like more sort of like geared to like being like a poison type of caster. Now I will note that he has like lacerating throw here. He also has like lacerating flurry down here. Basically, it can be used to like sort of like build up like a lot of like bleeding type of damage if you want. And if you look at his like his stuff right here, he's got poison shot, sharpshoot, ricochet, contaminate, deadly dance, shuriken jutsu, lethal burst, poison outburst, and relentless barrage. Note by the way, he doesn't have like any magical based like dash type here, but the thing about like the Moss Cloak is that he has like a very good like incentive to basically be like a poison based character if he wants to. If he wants to, you can make it into like a more physical damaging builds as opposed to like say like the the Magnemite, which basically is like very focused on incendiary. But this guy is like he's he has like some good focus basically on like being like a poison character or like, you know, a physical based character if you want him to. And it's part of the reason I basically have like fairly good success with this guy as well. Now, I'm not basically on top of like all this stuff here. A lot of this like oddments here are very, very nice for like, you know, keeping alive. I've had good like, you know, success basically grabbing say like shielding dash, which lets you like get a shield when you pass through enemies. There's also like blurring dash, basically gets to like, you know, blur to like basically protect yourself. There's shielding like flurry down here if you want to. And, you know, it's basically a lot to basically like about this character. I won't say like this is like the best character basically in the game basically to play as, but it's definitely a character that like, you know, it's definitely A class to say the least. So if you're looking for like, you know, a character basically like, you know, to have good success with and not necessarily like, you know, be like hamstrung into like, you know, one type of like thing, this guy can do it because he could be poison based if you basically want to, or you can basically make him into like, you know, just a more like, you know, generalist, like, you know, damage dealer, so to speak. All right, let's move on to the Weaver. Now, I know this is basically a very like, you know, complex class, but he's also a very powerful one as well, especially in a group. His ability is like, you know, to basically Fred and like, you know, constrict here. There's basically an augment on constrict that basically lets him pull enemies basically toward him. And you can also do that sort of like stick as well. And that can be very useful for like, you know, group-based play where you can basically like, you know, have like, you know, the Weaver basically like, you know, get like the augment here for like, you know, constrict. And I'll basically show this off here a little bit. Essentially, if you go in here and get the pulling constrict, where you basically pull enemies towards you, you can basically group enemies into a nice like tight formation for other players to smack on all at once to basically do a lot of damage, which makes it a very good support build. Now, I will note that like, you know, unlike the idea of being supporting, this guy also has like a lot of like abilities like say hexing Freds, which basically lets like, you know, hex enemies to like, you know, do a lot of damage to them. He also has sturdy Freds basically like shielding and like, you know, he can also like, you know, inflict like, you know, stacks of frostbite and burn to enemies that are fretted. He's got draining Freds basically that lets you like, you know, restore HP. And you know, he's got some like really nice stuff here. Now, if you want to, you could also have like say rope friction, like, you know, go for like sort of like a burn build this guy. I don't really like tend to like basically do that, but you know, it is a thing you can possibly do with this guy. It's like, you know, go for sort of like a burning type of build. He also has like defensive constrict, basically like shield here. To fill in like nice like damage, like increasing like, you know, abilities to like, you know, go for high damage. Again, more shield right here. And like, you know, there's some nice stuff basically to like, you know, build damage on this guy. Now, where this guy really shines to like, you know, the Weaver, or like, you know, I guess I could say like, you know, doesn't necessarily shine all the time, but basically he's got like these like, you know, extensions. Some of his extensions can be really, really good. I'll note basically if you get like, you know, any of like these like, you know, constrict like extensions, like M1 basically lets you like, you know, do like more damage because it's like, you know, meh, whatever. But you have like, you know, rope burn, but basically lets you like, you know, do like burn damage and detach Freds for like, you know, the HP healing if you want to. You've got Strangulate, which basically lets you do like, you know, 125 damage to all enemies basically regardless of like, wherever you like, you know, there's like multiple or not. Basically like, you know, the Weaver, when you have like multiple enemies fretted, and you're basically trying to use like, you know, constrict here. If you have like say 5 enemies like, you know, fretted at once and you use constrict, you're only going to do free damage based to each one. But with like this like, you know, strangulate ability, you're basically going to inflict 125 damage to all enemies basically. And there's lots of abilities to sort of like, you know, really amp up your damage to like, you know, high levels. So you can do a lot of damage to the Weaver if you basically want to as a result. Stick here is also really good. You basically have lots of fretted like enemies because you can also like, you know, do like, you know, massive damage to like, you know, enemies you basically have like all like, you know, in like a group with like, you know, pulling constrict and then like, you know, you stick them for like a massive like, you know, damage output. I think one of these ones right here, by the way, it basically like, you know, only is like a single target. So what is it, splice? So yeah, splice basically a single target enemy. You basically splice them for a lot of damage. This lets you like, basically like, eliminate enemies one by one if you want to. Not really my style, but it's something you can do. Then you got like, here's like the thing, like, here's what it's really good. Like you have these like army damage boosting like, ascensions up here for like, you're basically like Fred. So you have like, Loom here. Each attack Fred basically grants you like, increased damage. Or you could go with like Tether, which basically has it so like, on attacking Fred you basically get like, increased army damage. Which works really great with like, Rope Burn, for example. And it got like, Weave up here. Essentially like, inflict like Fred, controlled weaving grants like, army damage when you basically like, Fred all the enemies at once. It's a really sort of interesting sort of like, concept, the Weaver. Of course, it does have one mainly, major failing though. I'll note that basically like, there's like a lot of ways to get like, your damage really up in this character, but before like you basically get to like that point, early on this would be a very weak character to sort of play. The thing about the Weaver is that it's a very like, slow starting character class. So early on you're kind of weak, you need like, help from friends, or you need like a good vestige or like, omnics to help you out. So looking at the Weaver, I guess there'd just be like sort of like a B class like, character. He's very good for support, and can like get some really nice like damage output if you basically like build him for it. You can also build him for like, Incinerate, for basically build like a sort of burn build. But I'll note the major failing for this guy is the fact that like, he requires like a bit of startup basically to get going. He's not like just strong immediately, so until you get to that point where you're really like, just like, bulldozing everything in front of you, he's going to be a little bit weak. So he's sort of like it's average to resolve that. Alright, let's move on to the Obelisk. Now, this is your like, quote-unquote tank type character in this game. And you can build this guy basically to be a tank that basically like, absorbs damage for like his party members, and then like, essentially like, spikes damage that basically hit him as a result of it. Oops, went the wrong thing there. But anyways, the Obelisk. So, I'll note that the Obelisk basically has like, Iron Clap, Shield Bash, and Seismic Slam. And all three of these basic abilities basically like, sort of like correspond to his like tanky nature. Shield Bash is basically your like, upfront damaging like sort of ability. And Seismic Slam is basically like, get their attention and sort of like they all focus on you sort of ability. And then you have like Iron Clap here, which basically does like, very weak damage, but it gains like a shield when it basically hits stuff. So the thing about like, the Obelisk, a lot of people basically say like his like, primary like, mode of play is that you basically build up like a lot of like shield on him and build up a lot of spike damage. And from those like two aspects, you basically build like a sort of like, spike turtle, basically like, has like, draws all the attention basically to him, and then like takes like a bunch of hits. Personally, I don't really like to play them that way, but I mean, it is a thing. Like you just like, get like, spiked Iron Clap, or like, shielding Iron Clap, basically get like, spikes and shields. You can get like Daze to sort of like you reduce damage from enemies, so which is also pretty good. Shock can be used for like, either like upping like your shield bash, or like upping a damage for like, other enemies, and basically have like a friend basically hit the stuff. You got like Spike, Shield Bash, shielding like, Shield Bash over here for like, Shield and Spike over here. Increase damage to sort of like get their attention, do more damage, stunning, inflict daze and stuff. You got like dazing Iron Clap and dazing like Shield Bash, but I mean, this is cheap. I mean, this isn't, because it costs like 2 to, the normal Shield Bash. You can inflict Shatter, get like more damage and stuff like that, etc. And then down here you've got like, Seismic Slam, you've got like, shielding like Seismic Slam, inflict Shatter and stuff, of course. And like, so forth. Now, that's basically like, the sort of brain dead way of, I guess, will save like, playing this character. It's like, shield up and like, sort of go to Spike. But you probably noticed here that there's like, freezing Seismic Slam here. And there's also, of course, like, frozen Iron Clap down here. You may not notice, but this is actually a character that actually very much lends itself into being like, a frozen type of caster. And what I mean by this is basically it's like, his bindings basically. On Seismic Slam here, there's Avalanche. And this is basically an ability that, like, when we build a lot of Frostbite, you can basically inflict, like, crush equal to the amount of, like, Frostbite you basically have. So if you have, like, 100, like, Frostbite basically on an enemy for some reason, and you hit, like, Avalanche on him, you're basically going to inflict 100 crush basically to him all at once. And crush is basically, like, the special ability for, like, this character. Basically lets him, like, deal more physical damage, basically, like, when he basically, like, builds up, like, free crush. He also has some nice abilities as well, like, Earthquake. Basically, like, when you use, like, Earthquake multiple times, basically, in a fight. Each time you basically, like, use, like, Earthquake here, basically build, like, the damage basically up, they basically inflict with. So, like, the first time 125, second time will be, like, 175. Then you got Cataclysm Stem over here. That's basically a way of, like, getting, like, stacks of Spike. And that can be very nice just for, like, turtle up again if you want to. For Shield Bash, it's basically like, if you have, like, lots of shield, there's, like, a Shield Slam to basically do a lot more damage. Battering Ram, basically dash to an endpoint, inflicts, like, more crush. Headbutt, essentially, like, you gain, like, 5 stacks of Spiked. You take damage by doing this, but I mean, but you basically, like, you can, like, you use your, like, Spike defensively if you want to as well, which is pretty nice. Then there's, like, Impulse down here. This basically, like, turns into, like, a small arc in front of you. Just like this. Basically, like, gain shield, gain, like, crush. Slam is pretty nice, by the way, because it's basically a short area around you. So you basically can, like, do, like, a small circle. And you basically gain, like, free slam damage, basically letting you, like, sort of like, much like with, like, Earthquake, build up, like, your slam damage to a lot of, like, levels. And then there's Shell here, basically, like, you can gain, like, Spike, basically. So the thing about, like, the Obelisk is that he's a very interesting sort of, like, character, but, like, he can basically be used to sort of, like, tank, like, a lot of, like, damage, basically, for, like, your team. And, like, basically inflict, like, Spiked. But he can also be very much used to sort of, like, if you sort of, like, get, like, Frostbite, or, like, get, like, Earthquake. The Obelisk can be, like, a very, like, high damage dealing type of character if you want to as well. Now, much like with, like, the Weaver, there is a major weakness to, like, the Obelisk. This is a guy that's basically very, like, I guess we'll say orb hungry. So he needs to take, like, orbs in order to, like, use, like, say, Simon Slams more, or, like, Shield Bash more. Basically, like, the Magma Miner, the Moss Cloak, and, like, the Weaver, those are characters that can sort of, like, get away from, like, using, like, orbs, but in a group, basically, if you're, like, in a group of the Obelisk, it's almost like, assured that this guy's going to be the one taking all the orbs, because he needs to get his cooldowns basically down in order to, like, make his, like, abilities basically work. So it's a bit of a hindrance basically in multiplayer. And unless, like, you basically get, like, Avalanche for, like, a Frostbite type of build, or basically get Earthquake for, like, or sort of, like, build up, like, lots of, like, massive damage and, like, multiplayer type of build. He's kind of like, he's good basically to the Obelisk, but he can also be sort of like, a bit of a miss if you're, like, getting, like, the wrong build stuff for him. Overall, I like the Obelisk, but I mean, he does have issues with him. I think overall, I'd say, like, the Obelisk is probably, like, a B tier type of character, much like the Weaver. I'm not sure I'd say that the Weaver is basically stronger than him, or if he's basically stronger than the Weaver, but they're sort of, like, basically in the same rank, so take that as you will. Alright, moving on. We have the weakest aspect in the game, the Clairvoyant. Now, I say that this guy is basically the weakest aspect in this game because he's essentially a support character that is just ultimately terrible, to say the least. I found that this guy's, like, just very hard to sort of, like, deal with, like, supporting, like, his friends. You can make it work, by the way, but I mean, it's just so hard basically to deal with him. And he doesn't really have, like, anything really, like, to really make him stand out besides that, like his support abilities. I've seen people basically say, like, the Clairvoyant can be used to sort of, like, be like sort of like a tank build, like the Obelisk if you want to. Like, look at the Clairvoyant here. He's basically got telekinesis, which basically lets you, like, use, like, your, like, globe. And that's basically the thing this guy basically has. Like, he has this little globe in the field that basically moves around to do stuff. But when you basically pass, like, the globe basically through, you can basically build a shield to sort of, like, build up a lot of defenses for this guy. much like the obviously basically uses like a little iron clap to basically build up shield. And you can also use psychokinesis to basically gain 2 shield if you want to as well. And there's also astrokinesis basically do damage and stuff like that. This is actually a very pivotal amount of damage that you basically inflict with this thing, but it is what it is. Alright, let's just go into his offense here for a little bit, but the thing about the clairvoyant, it's basically all about the support. Now at the get-go he has 1 aura, but basically I think lets him do a little damage, but he basically has enemies in his shards basically it's field or nature, so to speak. It's aura range. And he has more abilities basically used as well. So he's got shielding aura. On turn start, allies in the aura gain 1 shield. And he's got hexing aura. Basically enemies in that area are basically inflicted with hex. He's got heal aura, basically allies are healed on turn end. Catapulting telekinesis, critical telekinesis. You basically get the idea. He has a bunch of auras, and they're pretty nice sometimes. One of the auras I actually sort of like is the empowering pulse. If the clairvoyant basically goes first in combat, he can be used to sort of use empowering pulse to basically power up an ally to basically get him a lot more army damage. And Dig in turn can basically use that increased power to do a lot more damage as a result. He's got shielding pulse, so allies hit by the shield can basically get shield, so you can basically put yourself and allies. He's got a damage aura, so on using any bindings basically in the aura, enemies will basically take damage. So you basically can sort of just pulverize enemies by being next to him with the shard and constantly using it constantly. And yeah, let's look at the auras here. I don't think there's any auras for yeah, there's no auras basically for Spirit Bomb here. By the way, Spirit Bomb is basically your nuke on this character, so you basically have Psychic Pulse is sort of generally Psychic Charge for powering this basically up. And I'll look basically with the bindings here, for example. There is sort of full charge astrokinesis lets you deal more damage. At full charge Psychic Beam here basically do increased damage. And of course, this is all full charge because this thing's all about powering up this Spirit Bomb in some nature or form. Anyways, this is sort of quick overview. Basically, it's basically all about the auras, and there's some basically showing the ascensions there. But outside of these ascensions and a little bit of the shielding, I find the cover is very, very weak. He doesn't really have any real damage capabilities on his abilities here because they're all very flat. So he has extended range and a little bit extra damage and critical and stuff like that. But I find this guy's very sort of weak to sort of use because a lot of his stuff is basically dedicated to auras and stuff like that, or building up building up his abilities to sort of do stuff gain on sonic charge, so basically getting charged faster, etc. And yeah, this is sort of go over his abilities here a little bit more. You got the will aura. This is actually pretty good, by the way, because this lets you get your will for your allies and yourself. So that's actually sort of decent if you get to that. That's good for basically building as a sort of tank. And that's of course about using your astrokinesis to sort of deal your main damage, so to speak. That's basically about your nuke if you basically want to make your Psychic Pulse nuke as opposed to your Spirit Bomb. There's Sapping Aura. Sapping Aura basically on turn end you basically get a charge for each enemy in the field, so you can use this basically to build up your charges faster. Spirit Wells would be interesting if you're basically doing costs freaking free cost here. Basically lets you pull enemies basically towards you, so it's good for friends. You got Spirit Cannon, basically lets you move your shard globe around with your Spirit Bomb. That can be useful for repositioning your globe to sort of do more damage with it. And then Super Spirit Bomb is your super Spirit Bomb. Just do a whole lot of damage all at once with it. If you can build this up, it can be okay, but I mean, it's just it's weak. Basically, the thing about the Clairvoyant here, he's basically a support character, but I guess that's sort of like no basically about like his shard globe. The thing about his shard globe is that like even though like the clairvoyant like is like levitating like, in the field, like just briefly go into him here for a moment. This guy like levitates off the ground, but he is still like subject to like blight. Here's the thing about like clairvoyant. I actually think this guy is a sort of like cool concept, and like I really like love his like sort of design play style, but he's just overall really weak. I would think if like he's basically like like above like the ground like as he is right now, if like telekinesis and like spirit bomb, if you're basically unaffected by like, blight, this guy would actually be a lot better. But because he like is like he is affected basically by blight unless he's like using like unless he's like using like Marker of the Unbound. The clairvoyant is basically like a character that like he could be like so good, but I mean he's just like he comes short basically in all areas, so to speak, is the idea of him. So I'm not going to basically like waste too much more time explaining to him, but this is basically a failure of a class. He's just like too weak overall is the thing, right? So how can I put this? Like I'll note basically in this game, positioning is very, very important for your character. And this guy has to spend like time positioning himself in order to like get like the benefits of like the shard globe basically going through him and stuff like that. And he really it's like he can't really support his friends here at well either, because like if he has to put like his globe in a bad spot, like basically away from them, they can't really benefit from. Or if he basically sort of like bounce like him and basically like benefiting his friends, it's basically hard for him to do as well. Like here's the thing: if this guy was like immune to blight, I'd probably like put him like higher. Or if you basically like can like sort of like freely move his like globe around and sort of do like a little bit more. Like you can basically sort of like here's the thing about like the clairvoyant. In order for him like his move his like shard globe around, he has to sort of like spend it in order like to basically do so. And he does that with like his binding, basically telekinesis here. He can also do it with like spirit can sort of move around. But I mean, because he has to sort of like move his like shard globe around, it basically means like he has to sort of reposition his stuff, and that basically takes will. And that's a certain other thing. Like it's like sort of like have like more will, or like if you basically like could I guess like free casting overall like telekinesis, it'd be okay with him. But he's just underwhelming this character, so he's an F tier as a result of that. You saw it briefly, but next one will be like Godkeeper here. Now, I'm not basically in terms of like balance and stuff like that. I consider Godkeeper to probably be like the most balanced character in like this game. Basically, there's nothing bad about him, so to speak, and you basically build him however you want to and be like pretty effective at it. If you want to basically specialize in like inflicting like a debuff type, you can basically use like bleed or smite damage with him, and both are quite powerful. He can also be like built to be like a sort of like solid damage dealer if you want to, or if you want, you can basically like plant down like a lot of like spears with like celestial spear here, and you basically empower like your friends because they can use the spear as well. So looking at the Godkeeper here. The Godkeeper basically has Impale, Celestial Spear, and Whirlwind. Now, Celestial Spear is basically a sort of teleport ability, but it requires you to actually cast your spear first before you can basically teleport with it. And essentially where you like land your Celestial Spear, you'll basically gain velocity when you basically use the spear. And the velocity you basically get is actually dependent on like how long it's basically on the ground. So as you can see here, you gain 1 stack of velocity for each turn it's on the ground, and disappears after 4 turns. So you can basically like, put it down for like 3 turns basically, and then like on like the 4th turn you basically like can grab it and get like 4 stacks of velocity, which basically means you deal 50% increased damage on your next attack, or your friend will basically deal it. This skill is basically just overpowered to say the least. So you can also like increase like other stuff with it as well. So you get like God of Lightning here. So the Celestial Spear now inflicts up to 3 smite per turn. It's on the ground, so massive amount of smites from it. There's Battle Standard. Basically, do like you have a bigger like damage radius with it if you want to use it as like an actual attack, which you can do as well. Gain critical charge per enemy hit. And of course, get like, your usual stuff from this. And there's like Blood Rain, basically lets you inflict like, bleed, inflict like hemorrhage. So if you want to like go for like a bleed build, you can basically do it like this right here. You got like Crimson Edge for like building like, bleed damage for stuff you basically hit. You got Endless March. Basically like, Whirlwind is basically like your super damage ability. This just lets you like, inflict like more with it if you want to. Stormcaller, basically smite more if you're going for a smite build. You got Divine Strike basically up here, just like you're getting a critical charge. And just have like fun of it, so to speak. You get War Spear. So basically like, gain 2 damage per enemy hit until end of combat. So basically you can like build a damage on this a lot. Lightning Rod. Basically enemies are hit take like, more smite damage. So again, another smite ability. And just by nature, by the way, just it's like inflicts a stack of bleed, so it's always like, helping you like get more bleed damage with it. And then you got like our stuff down here as well. So you got like, unlike, Celestial Spear, you basically have like, Shielding Spear. You want basically a shield from it. You got Turtle Spear, you can basically get like shield and blur. So if you want to, you can turn this into like, a shielding icon if you want to basically do it that way. Down here, for example, there's also like, deflecting, so basically get like shield for per near enemy hit. You get like, sturdy, like, whirlwind for like vigor bonus and stuff like that. Blur and velocity from like elusive whirlwind. And I think it's basically for like, protecting yourself with this thing, but you get the idea. The thing about like, the Godkeeper is that I don't think it basically has like any real like, drawback basically to using it. If you want basically sort of like build like a bleeding type of like, character, this guy can like easily do it, like say like Bloodthirsty Impale, and of course like some other stuff. And by the way, there's like an air shield ability right there, deflecting Impale. On the base, there's a lot of like bleed abilities, basically on like bringing Spear here, and the other stuff basically sort of basically like our stuff better. There's like shock by the way, if you want basically sort of like a shocking thing. No shock to our stuff, but whatever, it's fine. The thing about the Godkeeper is that all this stuff basically mixes really quite well, and you can basically like, sort of focus on being like sort of a smiter or like a bleeder, or it can be like a generalist that just does whatever it wants to. And I've had like good success basically playing the Godkeeper. I basically like recently played like the Offers Challenge, the Unbound with the Godkeeper, and I just like to smite my like way to victory with him with like Bloom of the Godscourt. Overall, I consider like the Godkeeper to be like the S tier like champion of like the aspects. So if you want like a character that's basically very, very good and like can never really be bad, the Godkeeper is basically it for sure. All right, let's move on to the Chainbreaker. Now, I consider Chainbreaker to be kind of a weak character because it's very, very complex to sort of use, and it doesn't really know what it wants to basically do. The chief thing about like the Chainbreaker is it's got like this combo ability, and it basically lets them reduce his like cost of other stuff. We basically inflicts like Rune Strike 3 times. And no, by the way, this guy's basically like essentially like magical and physical. Basically, all his abilities basically deal physical and magical damage, basically like rotating, so to speak. So basically, hit like Rune Strike, hits with physical. Next strike is basically gonna be magical, etc., etc. He's got Infused Fist, basically does magic damage, basically to like push the enemy forward. And then enemies basically collide with each other, basically take physical damage. And it's got Eruption, basically does like a blend of like physical and magical damage all at once. So it's like this guy basically like he's like doesn't know what he basically wants to do, so to speak, and you have to really keep that in mind with him. All right, looking at this guy's like bindings, the Chainbreaker. Now I will note that investigations here. Now, I will note that thing about like Runic Strike here. This is a teleport ability. So unlike with like say like the other characters, this guy doesn't really care about blight and stuff like that, and that can make him very powerful like in the end game when you're basically going against the Unbound if you want to go for that sort of thing, because you basically keep on punching the Unbound constantly. The only problem with him doing so is that basically when he basically punches the Unbound, he's going to draw the attention of like the main strike from him. So unless you're prepared for that, it's going to really hurt him. But anyways, looking at this guy here, the thing about like this guy here is like he's all about like punching things most of the time, and he's got like increased teleport range and like magical and physical strikes and stuff like that. Basically, like, sort of like focusing and stuff like that. He has like centering to get like shower and like effects if he basically wants to. He's got like venomous. This guy's he can basically like build like the Chainbreaker into like a venomous type of build if you want to. I don't really recommend that. As he's like only got like venomous rune strike, something down here as well, Blooded Chi Eruption, Virulent Fist, and like Plague Fist. There's not like a whole lot of like poison taunts basically for him to make use of, so it's usually better for him to sort of like focus on this being like a this punch like ending, like just like constantly punching, so to speak. Sap is like good if you basically defeat stuff with him, but I'm not really a big fan of like anything that requires you basically like to kill enemies with him. So it sounds cool basically like Sap, but it's like this whatever. Infusion's not bad. If you get like a few infusion basically on your punches, you can build like lots of shield this guy, or like if inflicting fusion, if you basically like punch something to basically inflict infusion and someone else hits him, they can get the shield, so he can be sort of like useful in that sort of like idea. I'll note the thing about the Chainbreaker. It's not that he's like it's not like sort of like he can't be strong. This could be a very strong character if you basically use him right, but it requires like so much thinking or sort of use him that's like a bit painful to sort of like think about all the ideas of sort of like how to basically get him up to where you need to do. Like I'll note basically like with like this guy here, I've had very good games with the Chainbreaker. And how can I basically put this? The film has bindings here. Some of them are like super powerful if you basically like build up for them. Like if you get like supercharged fists, just basically let them like deal like damage to like all targets. I usually get it, but it's there. There's finishing fist. This lets you basically push the enemy to do like massive amounts of like magic damage, double per combo stack. So if you basically build up a love combo and like use a finishing fist, you just like do like massive like insane damage to things if you're lucky. There's equalizing fist here, so this can be used to sort of get like more shield for your friends and stuff like that. This can be very good in like a big game, for example, equalizing fist if you get it, as a thing. There's like Reckless Lunge, Twin Lash. I like Twin Lash, by the way. Basically lets you deal like physical damage twice, gain additional stacks of like Martial Master, so you can like build up more for other stuff here. There's Death Palm. That's basically good for like getting poison if you're going for like a poison build. Same with Spear Corruption down here. This lets you get like poison and toxic. You got Chi Overload. Just basically deal like triple damage to either physical or magic damage to anything, which is higher. So by normal like actually physical damage will be higher, but if you build for like magic, you can basically like use that as well. There's Tether's Surge. Basically, this lets you gain like Martial Master per enemy hit, so you basically can get your like combo basically back fast if you want to. What can I say about the Chainbreaker that I haven't said already? I will note the thing about like Infused Fist. This can be a very powerful ability if you basically like have lots of enemies to sort of like claw them into, but you have to be very careful basically in like a multiplayer match, because you can also like push enemies basically out of where you basically need to hit them, or if you don't like have like the ability to sort of like get up to enemies so, like with strike, you might basically orphan enemies away from yourself to not be able to hit them again. That's just perfect with this guy. But overall, what can I want to say about the Chainbreaker? The Chainbreaker is definitely like a C-class character, because he can be very strong, but you actually sort of have to think a little bit with like using him. And in multiplayer, you can like make it one map room by basically ruins like gameplay for like yourself or like other like allies that are basically with you. It can be like quite strong, but I mean you have to basically balance it for the fact that like it can be very difficult to play, as well as like you can make mistakes and basically like ruin your gameplay is a thing, right? So that's the thing. All right, the Star Captain. So the Star Captain is basically a very late game unlock. So already obviously note that's basically one weakness for this guy, but once you basically unlock him, like, you know, he can be quite fun. So the Star Cap is basically known to be like, you know, a supporting type of character. Essentially, his ability like here, Frostbite, it basically lets him like, you know, build like, you know, Frostbite on like enemies. And if you basically get like, you know, almost basically increase your Frostbite inflicted, you can basically make it so like, you know, enemies, allies basically hit after you can inflict a lot of like, you know, extra damage result. He's also a drone specialist, basically like, you know, with like, you know, mission leader. He basically grants himself a drone for like himself and his allies, which basically boosts their damage by like, you know, 20 army damage, which is nice. And of course, you can also get like, you know, here's something on mission leader. Basically, this lets you build like, you know, army damage for like your allies and your friends, and you also get like a drone to basically use as well. It doesn't actually say that, but you know, it's there. Basically, you know, it's got like he's a drone commander. So on affecting an ally with a beneficial binding, so basically like, you know, this one right here. You basically grant him one stack of sentimental, you know, sentimental drone. Unless this is also a guy by like, you know, he really benefits from like using like, you know, on ally type of abilities if he wants to. So that's something to keep in mind. He's also got a Crawlclasm here. This is like a nice like giant nuke. Inflicts fairly good damage. Inflicts like lots of frostbite to stuff. So pretty cool. In many ways, the Star Captain is essentially what Clairvoyance should have been, but wasn't. Just to throw it out there. So you got like Chill Laser. Chill Laser can be upgrade and stimulate, which basically like grant like allies like increased army damage, or like, you know, just like, you know, just like natural damage if you want to. You got like Freezing Ray. This lets you deal like, you know, more frostbite damage. You got like Big Game Hunter, so lets you build critical. The efficiently lets you build like, you know, army damage of course, but you get like Shock Trooper, so you basically inflict like, you know, shock to nearest enemies. You got like, you know, Trailblazer, just like, you know, more increased like, you know, defensive attributes for your friends. Arctic Commander, basically like it lets you like grant them like increased frostbite damage, so they basically gonna like do more of that. And of course this Crawlclasm just lets you like, you know, you got Eye of the Storm here. If you use like Chill Laser on an enemy with Eye of the Storm, you basically inflict like, you know, massive amounts of like, this basically triggers like the effect again, so to speak. So until end of turn, the secondary hit of like, you know, is triggered each time a target is hit by a Chill Laser. So basically, if it's like an enemy and like in a bunch of enemies, you use like, you know, Eye of Storm on him. As soon as you hit him with Chill Laser again, you're basically inflict like a second effect like all damage basically around him. So it's very, very powerful. So that's a combination of like abilities. You got Long Winter here, just lets you inflict like, basically inflict like the 4 frostbite, didn't deal 15 like, damage inflicted frostbite like as friends. But the thing about Long Winter is that if there's lots of enemies basically on the field, you can basically use this over and over again to like inflict like over and over again. So it just keeps on going. And then there's Absolute Zero. The primary target takes additional damage equal to triggering all stacks of frostbite. So it's like a immediately kill type of thing. So before we talk about the ability like the Star Captain here, the Star Captain basically has the ability to sort of like shall we say inflict basically constant damage to like enemies with his abilities. The other characters like that basically gone over, most of them basically have like sort of like big spike damages to him, but this guy doesn't really have it. And this guy basically inflicts like staple like damage basically over time and like helps his friends basically out with his ability. So you get like frosted like Chill Lasers, increase like your frostbite damage. Long Chill Lasers just lets you like hit more guys and bounce distance. You can inflict like Hex and Shatter to primary target, which is very, very nice for like being like a focus type of like team leader. Shocking, that's just like from the get-go. If you basically shock something and like people hit it, you can do like a lot massive damage to that. On hitting, gaining like army damage until end of turn. This is very nice if you basically are focusing on this a lot. And of course, Synergy and Chill Laser, this lets you use like mission leader like more often, so that's nice too. Frost Leader grants frostbite damage in offensive mode. There's like Spike Leader for defensive mode. That makes it go faster. You basically increase your central like drone damage and basically use this effect. this spawning advanced additional central drones, so you can basically, like, give your allies basically more, like, abilities. The thing about central drone buy was this actually affects all your allies on the field as well as yourself, so they basically all benefit from it. There's, like, defensive mode resistance, so you basically, make your, like, your friends and your allies basically all resistant. There's shock collar, you basically, inflict marked on nearest enemies. There's, like, quicken mission leader, so swapping modes. Uses the cooldown of random buying by 2, so you can, like, use, like, the other stuff a little bit faster, like, this or your, whatever, like, thing you're using, like, make Cone of Frost or whatever. More like, Frostbite, you can get some shield. More Frostbite, you can, like, basically daze to primary target. You can mark them twice. There's basically, like, all the, like, basic good stuff for, like, the mission commander. Unlike, like, the Clairvoyant, which is basically, like, solely basically based on, like, being a supporting character, this guy basically is, like, a supporting character, but, he basically, like, still holds his own, so to speak. So, I think I, like, say, like, unlike, say, like, the Clairvoyant, which is basically a failure, this guy actually does what he needs to. Now, I wouldn't say he's basically, like, an S tier character, but I note that this guy is basically, like, you're like a A or B type of character, I think. And you know what? I think I'll say, like, yeah, he's basically sort of like A-based. The thing about the only, like, real weakness of, like, the StarCraft is that basically, like, he isn't available immediately. You have to sort of, like, grind your way out to basically, like, get him. But once you basically get him, he's basically, like, good to go for, like, whatever you basically want to do. You basically focus on, like, being a cold type of character if you want with him, or you can basically be, like, a supporting character, basically bust your allies with him. There's lots of ways to basically play him that make him really good, so, yeah. Alright, well, this was my tier list basically for, like, ranking the different classes in the game. Overall, I think I probably didn't explain it as, like, good as I basically could have, but I did rank them basically, like, with, like, some insight basically on how they basically sort of play. I kind of feel like Myanmar could possibly be, like, maybe like a C type of character here, but I do feel he's, like, weird in the Chainbreaker, so yeah. Probably just deserves to be a D. Alright, well, hope you guys basically enjoyed the tier list. I'll basically save this here. Until next tier list, we shall be, like, I'll be doing a near tier list basically, like, bindings, like, you basically pick up, draft bindings and such. Maybe one of trinkets. There'll be more basically come. So, hope you guys basically enjoyed this and take care.